of Italian ancestry who sailed for Spain. His name was Cristobal Columbus, etc., who then decides that he wants to travel to India because he's heard about it, and then he ends up landing in another location and calling the native inhabitants of the location he found Indians. But in actual fact, none of the people who were indigenous to this land were Indians. And anyone who says that he is an Indian is a liar. Now, whether that's not suspending belief or believing something that he thinks is true, it doesn't matter. The fact is, there's no way under any circumstances he could be an Indian, because this country has never been called India. Now, the truth of that cannot be avoided.
So how did that term Indians even get to...
Because Columbus didn't know where he was.
Uh-huh.
He thought he was in India.
Okay.
And as a result of that thinking, not knowing how to navigate, not knowing where India actually was, he in fact gave the name to a body of people that native to the land that he found. He started calling them Indians. So that you watch any cowboy movie or any Western movie, even to this day, they call the people on those reservations Indians.
Instead of Native Americans.
Well, they're not even Americans.
Natives.
Natives of the country. Okay, they're actually Aboriginal
Indigenous
people of the land. Yes,
yeah.
indigenous of this land. So we get the ignorant providing information as if that information in fact is true, and we find that the ignorance prevails because of the power and the ability to enforce the names by virtue of enforcing the replacement or placement of a people in an area of which they control. Not one treaty has been ever kept with the people who initially owned this land. Not one. This country has not kept not one treaty. So when you look at what's going on between Trump and what's going on between Biden, you look at what's going on with Obama and look at what's going on to Reagan and blah, 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 and falling back onto George Washington, you realize that none of those things were true. George Washington was given 20,000 acres of land by the country in their controversy and fighting with the British Empire. 20,000 acres for him alone. And he distributed that land to the men of which he was the general of giving them part of the 20,000 acres that he was given. Now I'm saying all of these things are factual, and I'm not suggesting they are part of my head. They're just a part of the fact that you can read. Now that being the case, that means that we have an examination to do in terms of our own moral and ethical premise as a people, to look at our entitlement to something that in fact is not ours. And so if we consider just because we died, we're entitled to part of the money that was stolen out of a bank, that doesn't make any sense. You should not have been in the car in the first place. It should not have been something that you consented to do. You're not entitled to anything that's stolen. Nothing. That means you are a thief as well. And you're now pushing the envelope to believe that you have the right to the ownership of something that a thief stole, and therefore because they are in control of it, therefore you're entitled to some of the ownership along with them because you help fight beside them or with them or behind them, or you help reinforce the policies that they wanted to execute. That means that price has to be paid as well. That makes you an accomplice now, after the fact, because you know better. It's one thing to be a thief and not know that you're a thief because you think that's how it's done, but that doesn't justify the crime of stealing or taking or theft. You still are accountable for that which you have did, with that which you have done. So by virtue of that, one must learn to suspend belief and get past that which they're told and examine the truth and the facts associated with that something.
So how does one start the process of potentially suspending belief?
First, by recognition that it's a lie. By recognition that the something that they believed, had faith was true, was in fact a lie.
Well, that first step is the hardest part for most people, and most won't even acknowledge that.
Well, the fact that they don't acknowledge it doesn't matter. What matters is the act. What matters is the something that was done, and by whom they did it against also matters. The natives of this country has tried perpetually to get this country's government to honor and recognize that which they have done to them, and this country has yet ever to honor and recognize that which. In fact, it has been said by other parties of varying kinds that God gave this land to them and that the natives of this country are holding it until the righteous people could take ownership of it. That's insane. Now, must understand that every European that left where he was, left because he was dissatisfied with the manner in which that country or that land was governed. This country is the only country within the course of history for Europeans that allowed the possibility and probability of ownership. Because when Europeans were living in Europe, whether that was France, England, Spain, Britain, Germany, Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, not to mention Russia, no one could own land. The royal families owned the land. This country was the first country upon its theft that gave them the opportunity to own land by coming here and help populating the space. So the country grew from the Atlantic Ocean, i.e. the East Coast, on across into the West Coast. That's how it grew. And the land rushes that you've seen in quote-unquote Western movies of asking or riding hard to get land and marking it off as your own territory, that is an indication of what was done in order to make it possible for previous peasants to own land. Because if they were in Europe, they could not own any land. Why? The kings and queens and the emperors owned the land and actually owned them as well. So the pilgrims leaving England and coming from other locations was to get from under the fascist behavior of the kings and queens and royal families that were told that they were given the land, that they were given under God's mandate. Therefore, they owned everybody and everything.
Well, thank you for this thought-provoking discussion, and we'll see you next Monday.
Thank you very much. Thank you.